What are the four toughest words you can hear from your customer? I'm sure you have lots of suggestions, but my nomination would be the phrase, "It turns out that." When you hear the words, "It turns out that" from your customer, probably nothing good is coming next, right? It's kind of like the phrase, "We need to talk" when you're dating. It's like it's all downhill from there, right? I'll never forget, I was working with a company a number of years ago who was doing a deal. It was the biggest deal in the history of their company. It was a multi-million dollar deal. It was the end of the quarter, as it always is. And the deal was about to come in. They'd done everything right. And then they got the call, and the call came from the customer with the phrase, "Yeah, it turns out that our capital review board needs to look at this deal because it's so big." And and what was interesting about the story, and of course the deal blew up, and it eventually came in 6 months later, but it didn't come in that quarter, and it got delayed significantly because the capital review board needed to look at it. And oh, by the way, the capital review board didn't meet for another 4 months because it only met on a quarterly basis. It's a tough story, but it happens all the time. But here's the thing that's interesting about this phrase, "It turns out that." Generally speaking, when your customer says, "It turns out that," it turns out legal needed to look this over. It turns out the procurement's got some questions. It turns out that my marketing team really wants to look a little harder at how this integrates with what they're already doing in their current strategies. Whatever it might be, there's always turns out to be something, right? But generally speaking, when your customer says, "It turns out that," the funny thing is, they're usually kind of surprised. The reason why they're saying it turns out this, we didn't know. It turns out the capital review board needs to look at this. We didn't even know we had a capital review board. And yet, the funny thing is, when your customer says, "It turns out that," is it more often than not that whatever they say next, while it might be a surprise to them, is probably more often than not a surprise to you, because you've probably heard whatever they're going to say next at least two or three other times, or at least your colleagues have certainly heard it two or three other times, if not more, in other deals that your organization is doing. And in that reality, I think is a really interesting opportunity to essentially in fact, I would suggest is practically speaking in your organization to do what I might call a "it turns out that" audit, an audit of all the things it turns out to be in the kinds of deals that you seek to do with your customers. What are all the ways that those deals go off the rails that are unexpected to customers themselves? Ways that, do they have a capital review board? Is that the company that told me the capital review board story said, what we do in every call going forward, we ask them, "Do you have a capital review board? And by the way, they probably need to look this over." And that's your opportunity, is to do the audit of all the things it turns out to be, whether it's legal, whether it's procurement, whether it's IT, you name it. And essentially provide your customers a proactive heads up that those things might in fact come to pass. Don't wait around and simply wait for those things to happen and let that deal go off the rails. We can actually coach our customers on those potential obstacles, help them give them essentially a forward-looking view to what might happen, the different things that might turn out to get in their way, and help them, provide them, equip them with the tools, the foresight necessary to prevent that from happening. Don't fall victim, and more importantly, don't let your customers fall victim to "it turns out that," when you in fact have it in your power to prevent that in the first place.